Okay, good afternoon. This is Ms. Cater's 8th grade science class, and today we are going to talk about chemical formulas and nomenclature. And nomenclature is just a big fancy word for naming. So we are going to talk about naming compounds and writing chemical formulas. When atoms are joined together, the compound is formed, and we represent that compound, whether it's ionic or covalent, with a chemical formula. The formula tells you the relative number of atoms in each element that's in that compound. So for example, H2O, we know that in that compound we have 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. For sugar, C6H12O6, that tells us that I have 6 carbons, I have 12 hydrogens, and I have 6 oxygens. That's a formula. There are 3 types of formulas that we deal with. Empirical formulas, which is the simplest whole number ratio of atoms. So if we made a ratio of these 3 atoms, carbon to hydrogen to oxygen, just like a ratio in math, we could say it's 6 to 12 to 6. Well, when we do that, we can reduce those numbers down, just like you can reduce the fraction 6/12 down to 1/2. We can reduce these numbers to 1, 2, and 1. Because 6 will go into 6 one time, 6 will go into 12 2 times, and then 6 will go into 6 again one time. That's an empirical formula. A molecular formula tells you exactly how many atoms are in that molecule, exactly how many are present. And a structural formula shows you how they're put together. H2O, for example, is hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. Okay, that's a structural formula. Ionic, the way we name things, there are 2 rules depending on whether or not it's an ionic bond or a covalent bond. If it's ionic, then we always use the empirical formula, the smallest whole number ratio. We name the metal first, and then we name the nonmetal. We change the ending of the nonmetal to IDE. So for example, all ionic compounds, since they have a metal and a nonmetal, are salts. So NaCl would be sodium. Rewrite it over here. NaCl. The Na would be sodium. That's our metal, so we name it first. The chlorine is our nonmetal. So instead of being chlorine, we take off that ending and we put chloride, IDE. And so it's sodium chloride. MgBr would be magnesium, name of the metal, and instead of bromine, we would put bromide. We are not going to worry about rule number 2. When you get in 10th grade chemistry, I will let your chemistry teacher deal with that. It's just a slight variation of what we did in rule number 1. So we're going to save that for later. Let's look at covalent bonds. What are the rules for covalent bonds? Well, unlike ionic bonds, in covalent bond, there's more than one way to put together 2 different elements. With ionic bonds, there's only one way that it will work. One thing takes, one thing gives up. But with covalent, since they share, we can have different compounds with the same 2 elements. So we need to find a way to represent what our formula actually means. The way we do that is with these prefixes. Mono is 1, di is 2, tri is 3, tetra is 4, penta is 5, hept is 7, and hex is 6. Okay? But you do not use mono on the first element. Do not use the prefix mono on the first element. There's no need to. It's just kind of a convention we've come to. The second element, again, always ends in IDE. We name the first element, and then we name the second element and change the ending to IDE. So N2 O3. The 2 means that there's 2 nitrogens, so we say di-nitrogen. The 3 means that there's 3 oxygens, so I say tri, and instead of saying oxygen, I say oxide. And it's called nitrogen trioxide. Okay? If there are 2 conflicting vowels right next to each other, you drop one of them off. So CO is carbon monoxide, not monoxide. And again, we don't put a prefix on when you have one carbon or one thing in the front. We don't put a prefix on that first element. So for example, if we were naming NO2, we would name that nitrogen, not mononitrogen, but nitrogen dioxide. Di because there's 2 oxygens. Okay. If I were naming things that have polyatomic ions in them, what I would do there is I would name the first element, and then I would name the polyatomic ion, which are those. That's why I had you memorize those and take 2 quizzes on them. We need to name the first one, and then we need to name the polyatomic ion itself, which if you don't know them, it makes it very difficult to name them because they're not listed on the periodic table. So for example, if I was going to have sodium nitrate, NaNO3, I would name the sodium first. That's my metal. And then I look at this, and that's not an element. NO3, as you memorized, is a polyatomic ion. The name of that polyatomic ion is nitrate. So the name of that compound is sodium nitrate. It's a compound that you might find if you read the back of your lunch meat package, because it's a meat preservative that's put in lunch meat and things like that. Let's try this one. Magnesium, MgSO4 is magnesium sulfate. Magnesium sulfate. And this is just a little mnemonic device to help you remember all the polyatomic ions that you had to know. Nitrate, acetate, sulfate, carbonate, phosphate. But again, just memorize those 10 that I gave you, and that'll be fine. Okay, moving on. And it looks like that's it.